It's a story that defies every principle of maritime logic and challenges everything we thought we knew about experienced sailors. What the Coast Guard discovered on November 18, 2023, floating abandoned in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, would rewrite the handbook on solo sailing disasters and leave investigators questioning the very nature of human sanity at sea. This is a mystery that continues to haunt the naval community to this very day, and the implications of what happened out there could shake any sailor to their core. In this story, we're going to dive deep into the chilling details of Captain Robert "Bobby" Henderson's final voyage, analyze his meticulous log entries word by word, and reveal the shocking truth behind a single word that would become his legacy. What we uncover will force you to question everything you believe about the ocean's ability to break even the strongest minds. This is a lesson that every sailor, from weekend warriors to seasoned captains, needs to hear. Because what happened to Bobby Henderson could happen to anyone who underestimates the psychological warfare that the vast Pacific can wage on the human spirit. Captain Robert Henderson was not your typical weekend sailor. At 62 years old, Bobby was a decorated Navy veteran with 34 years of service under his belt, including 3 combat deployments and countless missions across every major ocean on Earth. He had commanded nuclear submarines, navigated through Category 4 hurricanes, and survived situations that would have broken lesser men. His military record was spotless. Not a single disciplinary action, 3 commendation medals, and the kind of reputation that made junior officers straighten their backs when he walked into a room. But Bobby Henderson had a secret dream that burned quietly in his chest for decades. While his fellow officers dreamed of retirement fishing trips and golf courses, Bobby's eyes would drift to the horizon whenever he stood on deck. He wanted to sail solo around Cape Horn, the legendary graveyard of ships that had claimed over 800 vessels and thousands of lives throughout maritime history. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving something to himself. For 15 years, after his retirement in 2008, Bobby lived a quiet life in San Diego with his wife Margaret and their 2 grown children. He taught sailing lessons at the local marina, maintained a small fleet of rental boats, and seemed content with his peaceful existence. But Margaret knew better. She'd catch him staring at charts of the Southern Ocean, reading accounts of solo sailors who had conquered the Horn, and sketching modifications for long-distance sailing vessels. The dream was eating at him from the inside. The turning point came in early 2023, when Bobby's longtime sailing mentor, Captain James "Storm" Morrison, died at age 89. Storm had been one of only 12 people to successfully solo Cape Horn in the 1970s, and his funeral was attended by maritime legends from around the world. At the wake, Bobby stood before Storm's collection of sailing photographs, including the famous image of Storm's yacht, Defiance, rounding Cape Horn in 30-foot seas. That night, Bobby made his decision. He purchased Solitude's Edge, a 42-foot steel-hulled yacht built specifically for extreme weather sailing. The boat was a masterpiece of marine engineering. Reinforced hull plating, redundant navigation systems, storm-rated rigging, and enough emergency equipment to stock a small Coast Guard station. Bobby spent 18 months and nearly $200,000 transforming the vessel into what experts would later call the most over-prepared solo sailing yacht they'd ever examined. Every piece of safety equipment was top of the line and triple redundant. He installed 4 separate GPS systems, 3 satellite communication devices, 2 emergency position indicating radio beacons, advanced weather routing software, and enough emergency food and water for 6 months at sea. The yacht's medical kit was stocked like a floating hospital, complete with surgical instruments and enough medications to treat everything from appendicitis to severe injuries. Bobby even installed a specialized emergency rudder system that could be deployed in case of total steering failure. Margaret initially opposed the plan, but she knew her husband well enough to understand that trying to stop him would be futile. Instead, She insisted on being part of the preparation process. She helped him test every piece of equipment, reviewed his emergency procedures, and even completed advanced first aid training so she could better understand the risks he would face. Their children, Sarah and Michael, both experienced sailors themselves, spent countless hours helping their father prepare for what they all hoped would be the adventure of a lifetime. The preparation phase lasted 2 full years. Bobby completed advanced weather navigation courses, practiced solo sailing techniques in increasingly challenging conditions, and underwent comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations. He sailed Solitude's Edge through storms, equipment failures, and emergency scenarios until he could handle any crisis half asleep. Every expert who examined his preparations declared him ready, perhaps the most prepared solo sailor in modern maritime history. On September 15, 2023, Bobby Henderson set sail from San Diego Harbor with enough fanfare to launch a small fleet. The local sailing community turned out in force, with dozens of boats escorting Solitude's Edge to the harbor entrance. Margaret stood on the pier with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from pride. Bobby had trained for this moment for 2 years, and she knew that if anyone could successfully round Cape Horn solo, it was her husband. The first month of Bobby's voyage was textbook perfect. His daily log entries, transmitted via satellite email to Margaret and a small group of followers, read like a masterclass in solo sailing technique. He navigated through the challenging waters off Baja California with ease, handled a 3-day storm system with professional calm, and made excellent time toward his first waypoint near the Galapagos Islands. His log entries from this period revealed a man completely in his element. Day 12. Perfect sailing conditions continue. 15-knot winds from the southwest, making 8 knots under full sail. Water temperature 78 degrees, air temperature 82 degrees. Saw a pod of dolphins at sunset, counted at least 20 individuals. Equipment performing flawlessly. Spirits high. Missing Margaret's cooking, but not missing the television news. This is what I was born to do. Ville, day 18. Encountered first significant weather system. Winds gusted to 35 knots overnight. Seas built to 12 feet. Shortened sail and rode it out in complete comfort. Solitude's Edge is proving herself to be everything I hoped for and more. The storm passed by dawn, leaving us with perfect following seas, making excellent time toward waypoint 2. Day 25. Crossed 1,500 miles from San Diego today. Navigation systems all agree within 50 meters. Remarkable accuracy. Caught a nice mahi-mahi yesterday and enjoyed fresh fish for dinner. The isolation is beginning to feel natural rather than strange. I'm understanding why Storm used to say that solo sailing changes a man's relationship with silence. By October 15th, Bobby had covered over 3,000 miles and was approaching the most challenging portion of his journey, the passage around Cape Horn itself. His log entries remained professional and detailed, but those who knew him well began to notice subtle changes in his writing style. The entries became longer, more philosophical, and filled with observations about the ocean that bordered on the poetic. Day 30. The Pacific is revealing herself to me in ways I never experienced during my Navy years. When you're alone out here, truly alone, the ocean becomes a living entity. I can feel her moods changing hours before the weather systems arrive. The water speaks in languages I'm only beginning to understand. Margaret would laugh at me getting mystical in my old age, but there's something profound happening out here that I can't quite put into words. Day 35. Saw my first albatross today. A magnificent wandering albatross that followed the boat for over 6 hours. Storm told me that albatrosses are the souls of lost sailors, watching over those still making the journey. I always thought that was romantic nonsense, but watching this incredible bird soar effortlessly in 40-knot winds, I'm beginning to understand the mythology. There's an intelligence in its eyes that seems almost human. The entries continued in this increasingly introspective vein for another 2 weeks. Bobby's technical sailing reports remained accurate and professional, but woven between the navigation updates and weather observations were longer passages about the psychological effects of extreme isolation, philosophical reflections on man's relationship with nature, and detailed descriptions of marine wildlife that read more like poetry than logbook entries. On November 1st, Bobby's log entries took a subtle but distinctly different turn. Day 47. Something strange happened during the night watch. I was alone at the helm around 0300 hours when I heard what sounded like voices calling from the water. Rational mind says it was wind in the rigging, or perhaps whale song carrying unusually far, but the voices were distinct enough that I found myself answering them. Spoke aloud for nearly an hour before realizing what I was doing. Note to self, need to be more careful about maintaining normal sleep patterns. Isolation can play tricks on even the most disciplined mind. Margaret later told investigators that she found this entry concerning enough to send Bobby a satellite message expressing her worry. His response was reassuring but brief. All well here? Just the usual solo sailor head games. Nothing to worry about. Love you. Oh, but Bobby's subsequent log entries revealed a man struggling with something far more complex than simple loneliness. His handwriting, previously neat and controlled, became increasingly erratic. His daily position reports remained accurate, but the personal observations grew bizarre and disconnected from reality. Day 50. The voices are becoming clearer. They're not threatening, more like old friends calling from a great distance. I've started leaving the deck lights on at night because I think they're trying to guide me towards something important. Margaret would insist I'm losing my mind, but my navigation is still perfect and the boat is performing flawlessly. How can I be crazy if I'm still sailing better than most people sail when they're completely sane? Day 53. Made contact with what I believe to be other solo sailors. Can't reach them on the radio, but we've been sailing in formation for the past 2 days. 3 boats running parallel courses about a mile to starboard. They maintain perfect spacing and respond to my sail changes immediately. Professional seamanship of the highest order. Planning to close distance tomorrow and make proper contact. Coast Guard records show no other vessels in Bobby's vicinity during this time period. Satellite tracking confirmed that Solitude's Edge was completely alone in a section of ocean over 1,000 miles from the nearest shipping lane. Day 55 attempted to close with the other boats, but they maintained their distance perfectly. Curious sailing behavior. They mirror my every move, but never allow actual contact. Beginning to suspect they may be part of some kind of naval exercise or scientific expedition that I'm not cleared to know about. Will maintain current course and observe. The log entries from November 10th through November 15th painted a picture of a man whose grip on reality was slipping with each passing day, yet who continued to sail with near supernatural skill. His position reports were accurate to within meters. His weather predictions were flawless, and his boat handling remained absolutely professional. But his descriptions of the world around him bore no resemblance to objective reality. Day 60. The other boats have been joined by additional vessels. Count at least 12 now, maintaining perfect formation. They've begun signaling with lights, complex patterns that I'm beginning to decode. The messages are becoming clearer each night. They're guiding me towards something important, something connected to Storm Morrison and the other Cape Horn veterans. I think I'm being invited to join an exclusive club that few living sailors even know exists. Day 62. Breakthrough in communication with the other vessels. The light signals are actually a form of maritime Morse code that predates modern communications. They're teaching me the old ways, the methods that sailors used before satellites and GPS made navigation a matter of pushing buttons rather than reading the ocean itself. I feel like I'm being initiated into ancient mysteries that most modern sailors will never understand. Margaret's increasing panic was evident in the frequency of her satellite messages to Bobby. She begged him to activate his emergency beacon and arrange for rescue, but his responses became increasingly dismissive of her concerns. Maggie worries too much. Everything here is under control. Better than control. I'm finally sailing the way sailors were meant to sail, reading signs that technology has made us forget. The other captains are teaching me things they don't put in any navigation manual. Don't worry about me. I'm exactly where I need to be. On November 16th, Bobby's log entry was different from anything he had written before. Day 64. Tonight is the night. The other captains have been preparing me for this moment throughout the entire voyage. I understand now why Storm Morrison always had that distant look in his eyes after he rounded the Horn. He had seen what I'm about to see, learned what I'm about to learn. The initiation into the Brotherhood of Cape Horn is not just about surviving the storm and the waves. It's about crossing over into a different way of understanding the ocean altogether. I'm ready. That was Bobby Henderson's next to last log entry, his final entry, discovered 2 days later when the Coast Guard boarded his abandoned yacht, consisted of a single word written in large, shaky letters across an entire page. Welcome. Drill. The Coast Guard cutter Vigilant spotted Solitude's Edge at 14:37 hours on November 18th, 2023. The yacht was floating dead in the water, approximately 400 miles southwest of Cape Horn, her sails neatly furled and her deck gear properly secured. There was no distress signal, no signs of struggle, and no indication of mechanical failure. The boat was in perfect condition, better than perfect, actually. Every piece of equipment was functioning flawlessly. The hull showed no damage, and there was enough food and water aboard to sustain one person for another 3 months. But Captain Robert Henderson was gone. The Coast Guard search and rescue operation that followed was one of the most intensive in South Pacific maritime history. Aircraft and vessels from 3 different countries scoured over 50,000 square miles of ocean for any trace of the missing sailor. They found nothing. No life raft deployment, no emergency beacon activation, no debris, no oil slick, no clothing, and no body. Bobby Henderson had simply vanished as completely as if he had never existed. The investigation into Bobby's disappearance consumed maritime safety experts for months. Every piece of equipment aboard Solitude's Edge was examined by forensic specialists. His satellite communication logs were analyzed by Navy cryptographers. His medical history was reviewed by psychiatrists specializing in extreme isolation psychology. The conclusion was as disturbing as it was inevitable. Captain Robert Henderson had experienced a complete psychological break triggered by prolonged solo sailing, but had maintained enough technical competency to continue operating his vessel right up until the moment he disappeared. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a psychiatrist who specializes in treating solo sailors, explained the phenomenon to investigators. Extreme isolation combined with the sensory deprivation that comes from weeks at sea can trigger powerful hallucinations in even the most psychologically stable individuals. The human brain, deprived of normal social interaction, begins to create its own reality to fill the void. Captain Henderson's hallucinations about other vessels and mysterious communications are textbook examples of isolation-induced psychosis. But Dr. Rodriguez's explanation, while medically sound, failed to address the most disturbing aspect of the case: Bobby's final log entry. Why welcome? Welcome to what? And why was it written in handwriting that forensic analysis proved was Bobby's own, but in letter forms that suggested extreme emotional disturbance? The maritime community's reaction to Bobby Henderson's disappearance was swift and profound. Solo sailing associations around the world revised their safety protocols, mandating more frequent psychological check-ins and establishing new guidelines for identifying mental health crises during extended voyages. The case became a sobering reminder that the ocean's greatest weapon against solo sailors might not be storms, equipment failures, or navigational errors, but the human mind's inability to cope with complete isolation. Margaret Henderson struggled for months to understand what had happened to her husband. She read and reread his log entries, searching for clues she might have missed, signs she should have recognized. The Bobby she had known for 38 years was methodical, rational, and emotionally stable. Not the kind of man who would succumb to hallucinations and paranoid fantasies. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Her husband had lost his grip on reality somewhere in the vast loneliness of the Pacific Ocean. 6 months after Bobby's disappearance, Margaret made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She sold their house in San Diego, liquidated their investments, and used the money to establish the Henderson Foundation for Solo Sailor Mental Health. The Foundation's mission is simple: to study the psychological effects of extreme maritime isolation and to develop new methods for preventing the kind of mental breakdown that claimed her husband. "I can't bring Bobby back," Margaret told the Foundation's board of directors at their first meeting, "but I can maybe save the next solo sailor who starts hearing voices in the dark." Bobby would want his tragedy to serve a purpose, to protect other sailors from experiencing what he went through out there. The Foundation's research has already yielded important insights into the psychology of solo sailing. Dr. Michael Chen, the Foundation's chief researcher, has identified what he calls maritime isolation syndrome, a specific form of psychosis that affects solo sailors differently than other forms of isolation-induced mental illness. Solo sailors face unique psychological stressors, Dr. Chen explains. They're not just isolated from human contact, they're surrounded by an environment that is simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, predictable and chaotic, life-giving and deadly. The ocean demands constant vigilance while providing very little sensory stimulation. This combination can trigger hallucinations that feel more real than reality itself. Dr. Chen's research has led to the development of new communication protocols for solo sailors, including mandatory daily video check-ins with shore-based support teams trained to recognize early signs of psychological distress. These protocols might have saved Bobby Henderson's life if they had been in place in 2023. But even as the maritime community works to prevent future tragedies like Bobby's disappearance, questions remain about what actually happened during his final days aboard Solitude's Edge. The Coast Guard investigation concluded that he had suffered a psychotic break and either fell overboard during a hallucinatory episode or deliberately jumped to his death. Yet some aspects of the case continue to puzzle investigators. Why was the yacht found in such perfect condition, with every system functioning exactly as it should? Why were Bobby's final position reports so accurate if he was experiencing severe hallucinations? And why did his handwriting in the final log entry suggest extreme emotional disturbance while simultaneously demonstrating perfect spelling and grammar? Captain James Morrison, the Coast Guard officer who led the investigation, no relation to Bobby's mentor, Storm Morrison, admits that some questions about the case will probably never be answered. "We have to work with the evidence we have, not the evidence we wish we had," Morrison says. "The evidence tells us that Captain Henderson experienced a psychological crisis that led to his death. The exact sequence of events will remain a mystery." Yet Morrison also acknowledges that the case has changed his own perspective on solo sailing safety. "I've been in the Coast Guard for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of sailing accidents," he says. "But Bobby Henderson's case taught me that the ocean can attack a sailor's mind just as viciously as it attacks his boat. We need to prepare for both kinds of assault." The story of Bobby Henderson's disappearance has become a cautionary tale told in sailing schools and yacht clubs around the world. It serves as a stark reminder that the ocean's greatest danger to solo sailors might not be the towering waves of a Cape Horn storm or the mechanical failure of critical equipment, but the gradual erosion of sanity that comes with too many days alone on an endless expanse of water. For Margaret Henderson, her husband's fate will always remain a mystery wrapped in tragedy, but she has found purpose in ensuring that his death was not meaningless. The Henderson Foundation continues to fund research into maritime psychology, develop new safety protocols for solo sailors, and provide mental health resources for the sailing community. Bobby always said that the ocean teaches us lessons whether we want to learn them or not, Margaret reflects. His final lesson was the hardest one of all, that no matter how well we prepare our boats, we also need to prepare our minds for what we might encounter out there in the vast blue emptiness. The ocean doesn't just test our seamanship, it tests our humanity. The maritime world has learned from Bobby Henderson's tragedy, but it has also been forever changed by it. Solo sailors now carry more than just emergency beacons and medical kits. They carry the knowledge that the greatest storms they may face are the ones that rage inside their own minds. And somewhere in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the mystery of that final log entry continues to haunt everyone who heard the story. Welcome. Welcome to what? We may never know. But Bobby Henderson's legacy ensures that future solo sailors will be better prepared to maintain their sanity during the long, lonely passages that define the sport's greatest challenges. In losing one of their most experienced members, the solo sailing community gained invaluable knowledge about the psychological perils of their pursuit. The ocean keeps its secrets, but Bobby Henderson's story has become one of the most important lessons in modern maritime safety. That preparing for a solo voyage means preparing not just the boat, but the mind that must guide it through the endless blue wilderness where reality and hallucination can become fatally indistinguishable. His final word, welcome, remains a mystery. But perhaps that mystery itself is the most important lesson of all, that no matter how experienced we are, no matter how well we prepare, the ocean will always hold secrets that we cannot fully understand or control. The wise sailor respects those secrets and prepares for encounters with the unknown, both outside the boat and within the depths of his own mind.